Juneteenth, which is tomorrow, is still a new national holiday to some of us. So let's recap. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln made the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, essentially freeing slaves in the Confederate South. But it took more than 2 years for all the slaves to be actually freed. Texas was the last holdout. On Juneteenth, 1865, Union Major General Gordon Granger arrived with troops in Galveston and ordered the last slaves to be freed. That's the day we're celebrating tomorrow. But work to free African Americans was going on decades earlier, and upstate New York and the North Country were instrumental. That part of history on today's Story of the Day.
Support for Story of the Day comes from Long Run Wealth, an SEC-registered investment advisor in Lake Placid, providing comprehensive wealth management, retirement, and financial planning solutions. LongRunWealth.com. And the Devlin Inn and Suites, Lake Placid, welcoming families, athletes, and groups to the Olympic Village, offering Adirondack mountain views and dog-friendly accommodations. TheDevlinNY.com.
Hey, I'm David Sommerstein. It's Wednesday, June 18th. First up, a man was charged with multiple crimes after allegedly assaulting someone at the No Kings protest in Glens Falls over the weekend. Former Glens Falls Post-Standard editor Ken Tingley reported that a counter-protester punched a man below the belt during Saturday's rallies protesting the Trump administration. Police arrested Robert Hogan at the event. He's been charged with criminal possession of a weapon, second-degree harassment, and disorderly conduct, according to the Post-Star. Hogan was previously arrested for assault in 2020 after allegedly kneeing a man in the head at a polling place. New York has found a developer to build a solar facility at the former Benson Mines site in the northern Adirondack Park. Catherine Wheeler reports it's the first project from a New York State program to turn brownfields into renewable energy sites.
For decades, Benson Mines near Star Lake in St. Lawrence County was a thriving iron ore mine, but economic troubles forced its closure in the late 1970s. Now it serves as an aggregates and timber company, but a good portion of the land wasn't getting used.
The site, well, first of all, it's an iron tailings pile, right? So it looks like a moonscape.
Gillian Black says that's where the state saw an opportunity.
It's a great place to put a big solar farm. There's a lot of room. You're not disturbing neighbors. You're not disturbing sight lines, from the high peaks, that type of thing. And there's not a lot else that could go there.
Black is the director of the Build Ready program. It's under the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. The program looks to turn underused land that would be too expensive or risky to attract developers, like former industrial or commercial sites, into homes for renewable energy projects.
We would play the role of the private developer to de-risk and bring the projects to market for the private sector to then pick up and finance, build, own, and operate.
Black says the Benson Mines site is the first project Build Ready has completed from start to finish. That's after it found a private developer, Clean Capital, to buy the site and build a 12-megawatt solar facility. It will be one of the largest solar projects in the Adirondack Park, enough to power 3,000 homes.
It's a really neat project that had tremendous support from the town, the school district, the IDA, representing the county's interests there, the landowner, and the APA, who was the permitting authority. It was really a win-win project for everyone.
Black says it's also a win for the state's renewable energy goals. New York needs 70% of its electricity to come from renewable energy by the end of the decade, a target it's behind on. Catherine Wheeler, North Country Public Radio.
Here in the North Country, the fight for freedom began long before the Civil War. This weekend, several organizations are marking Juneteenth with a tour of underground railroad sites across the Champlain Valley. David Escobar has that story.
Before there was an interstate or rail lines, the North Country was part of a vast and secret network called the Underground Railroad. It helped enslaved people flee the South during the 1800s. But Jacqueline Madison says freedom wasn't just about escaping bondage in the South.
You want to be able to support yourself, to support your family. And you want them in an atmosphere where you're not fearful. You start thinking about other places that you can go that are much more secure.
Madison is president of the North Country Underground Railroad Historical Association. Her group runs the North Star Underground Railroad Museum in Keysville. It documents the journeys of the thousands of Black Americans who fled slavery in the South for freedom in the North. Madison says many slaves made their way up to big cities in New York and then continued north.
The routes were not straight up. A lot of times people think that, they just left the Albany, Troy area and came straight up. But that typically was not how they did it.
Underground Railroad routes stretch from Lake Ontario to Lake Champlain. Some runaway slaves passed through places like Watertown and Ogdensburg. Others traveled hundreds of miles from the Hudson Valley to Plattsburgh.
A lot of them walked. They had to ensure that they did not run into any slave catchers. Some of them were able to get buggy rides, or some of them actually used the waterways.
Safe houses along these routes offered escapees a place to rest during their long journey north. Madison says some abolitionists also used their own money to help people reach freedom. One of them was Stephen Key Smith, who ran a farm in the Champlain Valley town of Peru.
He talked about spending about $1,000 helping individuals get to Canada. And if you figure out that he spent $2.50 per person, he helped over 400 people get to Canada and get to freedom.
Not everyone continued to Canada. Some escaped across Lake Champlain into Vermont. One man named John Thomas made a new life in the Adirondacks as a farmer on land granted by a white abolitionist.
He would become a prominent farmer, well received by his neighbors, and in fact, slave catchers actually comes after him. And the neighbors said that they would stand with him if they tried to take him away. So he had the support of his neighbors to ensure his freedom.
The stories of John Thomas and Stephen Key Smith will be featured in a tour led by Madison this weekend in honor of Juneteenth. They'll travel to Underground Railroad sites across the Champlain Valley and the Adirondacks. Even for those who made it to the North or crossed the border, life still wasn't easy. Black people still encountered racism throughout New York and were excluded from most parts of society. And after the Civil War, they continued to face segregation, violence, and Jim Crow laws that limited their freedom.
Once they got their freedom, there were individuals who were coming up with other ways to restrict their activities and still have access to that labor.
The Underground Railroad was a beacon of hope for many Black Americans escaping slavery. But Madison says it wasn't until that first Juneteenth in Galveston, Texas, when all African Americans could claim full freedom.
You have to go back to the history of people being formerly enslaved, not having the ability to do and think and act for themselves without permission. And once they got that freedom, that Juneteenth, that ability to do that, it becomes a celebration.
Madison says liberty for all is an ongoing project. She says the Juneteenth message of resilience in the face of obstacles is universal.
Juneteenth represents freedom. It's the ability to say, I can do the best I can for myself, and I want to make sure I'm safe. Although it's really recognized with African Americans, everyone can relate to that. And so freedom is just as important to me as it is to you.
For Madison, telling this history and keeping the Underground Railroad's legacy alive is part of that ongoing pursuit of freedom. David Escobar, North Country Public Radio in Keysville.
To mark Juneteenth, the North Country Underground Railroad Historical Association is offering a tour of historic sites throughout the region. You can find out more about this weekend's tour at ncpr.org. We have more news there all the time, ncpr.org. Music today by Eddie Lawrence of Saranac Lake and Tim Ellifritz of Johnsburg. I'm David Sommerstein, North Country Public Radio.